Today, I want to share with you how to unlock your essence, or what I call your superpower as an artist, so that you can begin auditioning for and booking those roles that tell your truth and speak your story. Hey guys, my name's Hans Christopher. I am an actor, coach, and creator of the Working Actor series, and I'm excited to share this lesson with you today, so let's dive in. So the reason I came up with this lesson is because if you can start to understand what your superpowers are, and let me describe what I think the superpowers are. Superpowers to me are what makes you unique, what makes you special, what makes you have a place to tell your story, you know? And ultimately that's what it is. It's your story. What are the stories that you tell with who you're showing up right now in front of somebody else? What are the stories? Do you have an understanding of what those stories are? And do you showcase them? Do you have headshots? Do you have real footage that represent those stories that you know how to tell? Now, this isn't to say that every role you're going to book is going to be one of these stories, but what it does is it gives you the foundation of where to start, where you want to start that's going to make something special for you. I'm sure you guys have all, for the actors that are out there that have been acting, I'm sure you've all have felt you get this audition or you get this role and it's as if you just put on the perfect jacket. It just works. It just fits. It feels easy. It feels like the words just come out naturally. And then I'm sure you've had the exact opposite experience where sometimes there's something you just can't get behind. You can't put it on. No matter what you do, no matter how hard you work, it just feels like you're speaking a different language. So finding what your stories are, what your superpowers are, I think is so pivotal to understanding those roles that work so well. Because once you're able to find these superpowers, now we're able to fill in everything else, meaning headshots, footage, roles you go out for, breakdowns that are good for you. It just makes things so much easier. To put it another way, each one of us, each person has a different song they sing, right? And that song is comprised of different notes that you have taken throughout your life. And all of us understand some of these notes. Some of these notes are the same for each of us. So say I play this note of something that I've done, something that I've experienced in my life, and you recognize that, you understand it. And I'm not saying recognize it up here. I'm saying it here, right? Understanding it with your subconscious, with that child artist. That's why we go and see the movies, because we can be like, oh my God, I know what that is. So each of us have these notes, and our song is comprised of all of these notes, these things that we've experienced in our lives, these things that sometimes aren't necessarily based off of good things. Sometimes they're based off of traumas. Sometimes they're based off of life experiences, things we've gone through. Sometimes they're based off of things we want to go through, where we expect ourselves to be. So that's why I've created this. It's a few-part series, and the way that I look at this is I want you to think of it kind of like an onion. If you've never gone through anything like this, if you've never done any therapy, if you've never done any deep work, it's like peeling away the outside of an onion. The more work and the more things you do, the better you start to become at understanding the stories you tell and what drives a lot of the things you do. And if you can recognize that and understand that, well, now you know the direction you can go, that you kind of just fit in naturally. So I'll give you a perfect example. Myself, I ended up. Let me just pull this up so I'm not going completely off the rails. But my example is I was a very, very sensitive child, baby. I would cry all the time. I would whine. I think one of the earliest memories I have is I remember my best friend's dad saying he was going to put me on the front of a fire truck because I whined so much. But these are some of my early memories, and I was very sensitive. So what did I do as I started growing up, as I started becoming a kid, as I started getting peers? that wasn't cool. That wasn't acceptable. I got, laughed at by doing that. So I started from a very early age. I learned to put on this coat to pretend that I wasn't sensitive, to build this avatar of myself that was a protection mechanism, because that to me wasn't okay. Being sensitive, being vulnerable wasn't something that was acceptable by my friends, by my peer group, even by my family. And so I leaned into trying to be tough. I leaned into trying to be cool, being salt of the earth. Everything's fine, no big deal. And most of my friends and most of the people in my life saw me that way. So I'd go through, I became a bartender. I started doing all these things, and everyone in my life is reflecting back to me what I've been putting out. I built this armor around me to hide and protect this vulnerable, sensitive side of me. Now, what happens when you get into an acting class, when you get in front of people, when you get in front of what you perceive as judgment, that starts to fall apart. We are very, very smart at seeing the truth, and that thing that I've created of everything's fine, no big deal, salt of the earth, just falls apart. Because you can see, as the audience member, as somebody watching me, that scared little kid come out. The nerves, the fear, the anxiety. And the more I try to pretend it's okay, pretend I'm not that, the more disconnect there is, the more uncomfortable it is to watch. And the less truth there is to the story. The reason I say that is in that, and it took me a long time to figure this out, but in recognizing and understanding that this vulnerability and this sensitivity was actually my superpower, I was able to end up using it as a tool and using it as a thing that I put on to characters I play now, which I'll try and explain what I mean by that. But what was happening in essence is I would show up to my class, and who I was, who I truly was not being shown. I, inside, was nervous, I was shy, I was terrified, I was scared, and that's how I walked around, and that was the thing that I was guarding, that was the thing that I was hiding. To people outside of myself, they saw this comfortable, together, everything's cool, everything's funny, no big deal. That was how other people saw me. And then how I wanted to be seen was carefree, just brutally honest. Somebody who was charismatic and could just didn't give a shit about what like who they would affect, or honestly didn't give a shit, didn't have the feelings of embarrassment or shyness at all. That was what I wanted. That was what I strived to be. And the reason I say this is the more out of alignment those three elements are, the harder it is to find your truth, to find what your superpowers are. So what I end up doing, what I have my students do is I have them go through a process. So the first thing that I have you do is, has everybody heard of breakdowns? Does everybody know what a breakdown is? Yeah. For anybody, if there's anybody who doesn't know what a breakdown here, I'll just break it down quickly. A breakdown is like you can do it very simply with yourself. A breakdown is your name, 3 descriptive adjectives. Now, obviously, you can't put your entire life and your experience into 3 descriptive adjectives. And then let's do it really simple. Maybe 1 sentence, right? So if I were to do something for me, or something, a character that I was playing, let's say that, maybe I would do Hans, wiry, broken, and loyal to a fault. Hans is struggling with addiction, and this new love affair he has with this girl is challenging him in some way or whatever like that. That's just a very simple explanation of a breakdown that I have that I use that maybe for a character that I would play. Now the way you start getting into using a superpower and getting it to where it becomes something that's very, very true and honest with who you are and a representation of what you are is you start pulling from each one of those things. So the first thing you have to do is you have to get very, very specific with who it is you are, right? And that just comes from in here. You have to be honest with yourself. And a lot of times, this is when I talk about the layer, the outside layer of the onion. Come up with 3 descriptive adjectives for who you are and a little sentence of what you think that is. And now, you can have, there's different stories that we tell too. So just by doing one version of this doesn't mean that that's exactly who you are. But just try and emulate it, or try and do something that is today, speaks to who you are, where you come from right now. Also too, this doesn't mean that this is you permanently. You tomorrow can be completely different than who you are right now. This is just an exercise of trying to check in with what's going on with you, who you are right now. What's that story you're telling right now? And then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to find out who other people think you are. Meaning, if you were to go to, your sister or your brother and ask them, give me 3 adjectives in a sentence to describe who I am, it could be completely different than how I view myself. If you were to go to somebody in your class who's never spoken to you and said, by looking at me, what do you think, 3 adjectives in a sentence? It could be completely different. And think of that in terms of what casting sees. When you walk into a room and they don't know who you are, that snapshot of who you are, that representation without getting to know who you are, could be very, very out of alignment with what you feel on the inside, right? It could be very different and out of alignment with what you want to be seen as, because that's an element of this too. So once you're able to get a few, and this would be something that I would do, is go out and try and find different views, different perspectives of people and what they see, and just see how different those things are. The more in alignment those things become, the more your essence or your truth or your superpowers are kind of showcasing who you are. It becomes very easy for people to see who you are. The last thing we want are headshots that don't portray you for who you are. Meaning they're not in alignment with what people see, it's not in alignment with what you think, and it's not in alignment with what you want to be. The more we can get those things to be in alignment, the better we are. And all you need is maybe 1 or 2 headshots that represent those things, and now you're cooking with some fire. So that's one element. And then the third part of it is I would then do a breakdown for who you want to be, right? That thing that you're striving to be, that thing that you're striving for, right? Because that's another element. That's something that's in there. And by doing this, you start to get closer to the truth. You start to get closer to what makes you special. Not what you think you are, not what they think you are, not what you want to be seen as, but a marrying of all of those things to start to get closer to your truth, your song, that song that you sing and some of the stories that you tell. So that's the first thing that I would do is you create a breakdown for yourself, pulling in elements from different stories or from these different versions of yourself that are out there, right? And you can continue to go deeper and deeper with these things. And what you'll end up finding is by doing this, by getting very specific with breakdowns like this, you'll end up coming up with things that are so true that the characters that you play, the things that you do through it, when you start to tether that to characters you're going out for, it's so real, it's so honest, it has so much depth and so much to unearth that it just it makes everything you're doing amazing. And it doesn't mean it's that one role. Sometimes these, like I talked about with the notes, sometimes those notes, it's as if all songs are played with the same notes. It's just a rearranging of different notes that get different things sung. And what you'll find is as you start to get good with understanding your story or these different versions of your stories, you'll be able to put it on characters you play. You'll be able to find similarities between characters you're going out for and be able to snap into it immediately like that. So what I have my students do is they go through a process of doing this. Go through a process that it's not easy. It's not like a quick overnight answer these questions and you're done. It's more of an ongoing process of unearthing these different breakdowns, unearthing these different things that people think of you or would think of you, unearthing these different ways you think of yourself in different circumstances, and then putting them on characters, right? Creating characters out of that are based off of your truth. That's when you really start playing with kind of superpowers, as I like to say. So that would be the first step, is you create breakdowns for yourself based off of that. And then the next step is or the next kind of iteration of that is to start to think of the stories you have in your life. What are the different versions of different stories that you've gone through in your life? So for example, I use the one of me being sensitive, right? And putting that armor on, the story of trying to pretend like everything's okay, right? Which is a really compelling story and something that you see all the time. That's sometimes some of the most gripping stuff. That's somebody who isn't okay trying to tell you they're okay. You know, everything's fine. Everything's fine. The more they lean into everything's fine, the more you start to realize, like, oh shit, it is not okay. Things are not good here. But starting to be aware of, like, oh, that's a story that has made up a part of who I am, and now that's an element that I can use, that I can start to find and search for in the work. Another story that speaks really close to me, and I think it's why, you know, I enjoy and I really am able to lean into stories of addiction and some of the really complex and heartbreaking characters that come out of that, is looking back on my life. And this has come through a significant amount of work, therapy, learning about myself. So that's why I say it's like an onion. This can dig up some things in your past and yourself that if you don't understand what's going on, or if you're living like I was 10, 15 years ago, in the sense of not even aware that I'm putting up this armor, this can become as quite a shock to you, or you may not even get it. You might not even understand what it is. But one of the stories that is very prevalent in my life had to do just with the story of abandonment. You know, I have an abandonment issue that happened in my life, and from it, the story that comes out, the thing that I extracted out of it is, why don't you want to be with me? Right? So out of all the story and unearthing and work I've done on myself and learning about that, there's this saying that came out of it, which is so prevalent in people with addiction or people with loss or people who are clinging to something. And it's a story of for me, it was, why don't you want to be with me? You know? And that's something that became my superpower, something that I was able to use and still use in a tremendous amount of the roles that I play. And it's not that I'm using my past. I'm not sitting here and trying to be like, I'm going to try and think of that day that I was left behind. It's more a sense of understanding that is a note, that is a string that is so prevalent in my life, that runs as an undercurrent of so many of the things that I do, that it's something that I understand and I recognize it, and I'm drawn to characters like that, and I'm drawn to roles like that because of that, because I understand that feeling so well. That's what I talk about from the superpowers, is starting to understand those notes, starting to have an awareness of those notes in yourself, those strings that when you pluck them, you feel yourself, everything in you lights up. and it just becomes very, very, I don't want to say easy, because these roles, none of them are easy, but it becomes recognizable. It becomes a story not only you know how to tell, but you need to tell. You start to want to serve this character because yours and the character's stories are so intertwined now. And so for me, that's what I start talking about when I'm talking about these superpowers. And I think eventually I'm going to get it to where maybe it's a step 1, step 2, step 3. Right now, it's much more of a brainstorming and just kind of talking this out. Usually it goes over the course of a few weeks with the clients I'm coaching, and we kind of hash this out together. But it's a process. It's an uncovering and a discovery. Not this is what happens. You do end up learning a lot about yourself, but what I'm trying to do is use the things I know and I've learned about my story to be able to tell those stories again. So it almost becomes kind of a way to marry the story to the character. And when you can do that, then you really start having compelling characters, and having characters that are so true to you, that are so true to your essence, that people can't help but lean in. People can't help but want to know more. And so once you start to have a recognition or an understanding of these superpowers or these notes, it becomes very, very easy to create authentic characters out of them. So it's almost like working backwards, in a sense of you start to create these versions of true, authentic stories of yourself, right? And through these different breakdowns. Then you can work backwards and say, okay, what are some of the roles that are out there right now that fit this thing that I've just created that is so true to me? What are some of the headshots that I can do that represent this character that I've created, this story that I've created that is so true to me? What are some audition footage and audition reels that I can find and use that fit this character that is so true to me? Getting reels that match this. And what you'll find is once you've created these characters that are based in truth, right? Perfect example. Once I create a character that represents this, why don't you want to be with me, right? Which an addict or many of these things. But once I've created that compelling character and the image of that, and I have that on tape, it's very, very easy to sell yourself, because your representation, your manager, your agent sees exactly what you are, knows exactly what that is, and knows in that terms, that's the product. They know what they're selling, and they know how to pitch you. Casting will see that, and they'll know exactly what you are, and they'll know what shows to put you in. So that's why I call them superpowers, is because they're those strings that make you unique. They're not always based off of bad. Sometimes they're based off of all kinds of things. We're humans. All these experiences go into what makes us us. But it's up to you to be able to dive in and uncover what your strings are, what your superpowers are. And if you start to do that, and you start to get that out, and then you start to get breakdowns that represent those, and then you start to get headshots that represent those, and then you start to get audition footage and reels and footage that represent that, your life as an actor and your manager and your agent's job becomes 1,000 times easier. And even more important, you begin to start telling stories that are compelling to you, that are true to you, that speak to kind of your essence. It's just going to naturally start to go in that direction. So this is kind of what I use to help people who are always saying they're getting roles. Their agent doesn't understand the roles that they want to go in for. You're getting submitted for all these things. This is what happened to me quite a bit, was because of the way I look and because of the way I present myself to managers and agents as this calm, cool, everything's under control. They would send me in for these roles where I had to be fucking the lead who had everything together and, you know, would always figure things out and take care of things. And meanwhile, if that person is inside who's terrified, who's afraid, who's scared, who's shy, who's nervous, it's completely out of alignment. And it's no wonder I struggled for so long, because I wasn't being honest with kind of what my story was, and then how to authentically represent that. And the funny thing is what you'll find is, as you start to lean into these stories, as you start to lean into these things that I used to view as weakness, right? Being sensitive, you'll actually find that strength comes from that. Your ability to accept it and allow it to be will actually be strength. Will actually provide you with the strength that you were pretending to be, or from my case, that I was pretending for so long. So that said, I'm going to show you a little example. I'm going to show you guys an example of what using some of these superpowers can turn into. This is kind of the back end of it, but when you start to have an understanding of those things you can play, this is what I send to my reps, or I sent to my reps. I believe it was last year or a few years ago. I'm adding it in the chat now. It should be a PDF. And it's just an example of something I used. I call it a castability sheet. But once you start having an understanding of the different things you can do and those different notes that you play, you can create something like this that makes your reps have an understanding of those things that you are right for playing, those shows that you are right for, where you want to go, what you want to be seen as. And it's a way, A, to make your reps be like, holy shit, this person is really working behind the scenes. And B, it starts to put you in the lane that you want to be in, that is best for you, that works best for you. So you're going to have more success when you get good with yourself and understanding those notes that you play. But then the next step is being able to relay that and communicate that with your reps. And once you do that, now you all of a sudden start going out for those roles that you wanted to be in, those things that are right for you, and things will start taking off. So with that, hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. If you would want a copy of that castability sheet I talked about in the lesson, I provided a link below for you to download if you'd like it. And I'll leave you with this. If there was a part of today's lesson that spoke to you and you thought of a note or a story or a superpower that rings true for you, I would love to hear what that is below in the chat. Leave me a comment. I'll check it out, and I look forward to seeing it. Thanks so much, and I will see you in the next lesson. Later, guys.